Yo, what up, Toshi here? I meant to talk about this yesterday, but this did not show up at the time of me logging into the game, so I do apologize for this video being a little late, but is better late than never, honestly. We have a 10 pull given for free for the limited weapon banner. Should you roll for Jinhsi'S weapon, or should you save for Changli or any other future character? Let's talk about that. So I ended up getting Jinhsi'S weapon yesterday, and in hindsight, I probably should have recorded this video in advance, but I did ended up swapping off of the 5-star standard broadblade and giving this weapon to Calcharo. But in the difference of using, well, this weapon here, the best in slot for Jinhsi, and then swapping off Calcharo, well, now Calcharo's weapon, right, or really his best in slot weapon, I found that this weapon gave the character is not even close damage difference, because you're getting a ton of crit rate, and then the resonance skill damage is everything the character needs. I mean, this is really all she needs, because most of her damage, and not all of her damage, is dealt through the skill. And even though the 5-star standard banner weapon does buff the resonance liberation damage, and don't get me wrong, Jinhsi herself, she has an extremely high multiplier. Like, in all honesty, if we look at her resonance and liberation, her multiplier is extremely high, right? This is competitive. It is higher than the Havoc Rover, but it is competitive to the Havoc Rover's, multiplier in terms of ultimate. So she hits extremely hard with this. But the thing is you're not ever really getting this because you have 150 resonance cost. And even though I used her in the same team alongside Yang, giving energy to the character I do then swap into, I'm missing out on the Forte circuit, building stacks on that for Jinhsi, and I am not really getting much value from the 20 energy here, even though I do have slightly quicker ult rotations. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, although I just like using the two together. And then I swapped to Yinlin, and then got off of Yang, and I replaced Jinhsi'S weapon with the 5-star best in slot weapon, and then her performance, it just skyrocketed. So even if you don't want to use this weapon on Jinhsi, which can very much still be the case, you can use this weapon on Calcharo and it still works extremely well on the character. I mean, he does a ton of damage with his resonance skill, right? And then the attribute damage bonus is extremely good because this buffs all parts of his kit. It's just a damage percent bonus given to the character. And then the crit rate is also extremely good. But even though it is good for Calcharo, it's good for other characters too, because the attribute damage bonus is for every single attribute in the game. Doesn't matter what element the character is. And then, of course, the resonance skill damage bonus just buffs the resonance skill damage of the character wielding this weapon. So that means any character in the future that is a resonance skill dependent character with a broad blade typing, right, and wants to utilize or have crit rate because maybe they don't get that much crit rate in their kit, you're going to probably want this weapon at some point for a future character, unless they make the characters in the future broad blade users extremely niche and don't function like Jinhsi, for instance. Like 6 months from now, a year from now, how valuable would this weapon be? Because this is an investment for your account, especially if you are someone who does not get very many weapons in this game. Now, obviously, I thought I mentioned this too. The Commando Conditioning is actually a really solid 4-star weapon you can use on characters like Donjin, Yang, for instance. I use this weapon on my Donjin. When I get the sword, of course, from the standard banner, the 5-star sword, then I probably will replace this with that 5-star sword. And then Changli comes around, I definitely won't be using a 4-star sword here. I'll use a 5-star standard sword, which is better in comparison compared to the 5-star standard broadblade, and that's only because you get crit main stat instead of attack percentage, which crit is more valuable than attack percentage because, again, crit stats are harder to come across versus attack percent. Remember, you get attack percent from the weapons, you get attack percent from the character's base kit, you get attack percent from characters buffing you, like for instance Verena giving you attack percentage. There's just so many attack boosting things in the game right now versus crit rate. I mean, there isn't very many sources of it. Now, the thing is about Jinhsi, you can use a 4-4 build in the character, and the reason why is because the Spectro set does have 2 cost 4 echoes. So instead of using a 4-3-3-1-1 build like I have now, you can use a 4-4-1-1-1 build, and it's going to work perfectly fine. In fact, it would be pretty nice if you are lacking crit stats, and let's say you don't want to get her weapon, then I would suggest you go with a 4-4 build, because that will allow you to have crit damage main, right? And then another crit rate main, right? And you'll have more crit stats to work with. It will make building the character a lot easier, because when I did unequip this weapon that I have present on Jinhsi, I'm sitting at like 60% crit rate, and I did swap to this right here, the 5-star broadblade. And I mean, look at this, my crit rate dropped off a cliff. I mean, she has a lot more attack percentage, but I have like no crit rate. So the best thing for me rolling for Jinhsi'S weapon was giving the last weapon I had on Jinhsi' to Calcharo, and now he feels a lot better to use because he has a 5-star weapon himself. And honestly, this is the best weapon you can use on a character because resonance liberation damage, he does a ton of damage with his ultimate, like when you first press it, and then when you do your attacks, some of those attacks count as resonance liberation damage while he is in his ultimate stance. So that's also really nice. And the energy regen is extremely good for this character because in a team of Yinlin, especially with the fast rotations, you're probably going to want some sort of energy regeneration because let's just say you don't have his first copy, you're not getting that energy after you use your resonance skill, so you're going to need some way of getting energy aside from, of course, getting energy regen in his echoes for the substats. Okay, so this is Changli'S best in slot. Take this with a grain of salt because this, I don't believe they actually showed it within Wuthering Waves yet. I don't think the weapon has been revealed and the stats and everything and the passive. So again, take this with a grain of salt. It could be tweaked a little bit last minute. Or the wording could be different from what it is here, which means that the weapon will work differently, slightly differently. But anyways, apparently the weapon is giving an attack percentage increase to the character that does, go up to a certain amount. Very interesting. Just like the 5-star standard weapon giving you attack percentage in a passive, but that's just a passive compared to just the first part of this passive, right? So anyways, upon dealing damage, you increase the searing feather stack or whatever, blah, 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 resonance skill. So you basically get resonance skill damage bonus increase, and it stacks up to an extremely high amount. So the resonance skill damage is extremely good for Changli because she's a character, you probably played her trial, where you're just spamming her resonance skill because she has a very nice mechanic where the resonance skill, even if, let's say, you don't use up both charges of the resonance skill, they both have separate cooldowns, which is very nice, if that makes sense. So the resonance skill is extremely nice for the character, damage bonus. So let's compare this to the 5-star weapon that is currently in the game already. And then let's compare one last thing. We'll compare this to Jinhsi'S 5-star weapon compared to the 5-star Broad Blade, if that makes sense. So I currently have the Emerald Genesis on my rate up, and I definitely want to get this as soon as possible because this will be the weapon I use on Changli. It gives you energy regen, which isn't the best thing in the world for Changli, again, because she is resonance skill focused, not resonation liberation damage rate. However, she does buff the resonance of the next character you do then swap into, but she's not really the character you're looking to have the energy regen on. But it's alright, it's whatever, it's just one part of passive. You get an attack increase that does stack up to 2 times, and it does last for 10 seconds. So you get a 12% attack increase on top of the crit rate you do get from the main stat. Remember, it is a 5-star weapon, so you're getting a higher base attack. So that means for damage dealers especially, this is extremely nice compared to a 4-star weapon because you don't get that high of a base attack, which then your attack percentage scales off of that base attack, right? If that makes sense. So that's why you end up with a higher attack overall when you have a 5-star weapon on a character versus a 4-star weapon on a character, if that makes sense. Anyways, this attack percentage is decent, but what will make it better is when you get refinements on this weapon in the future, then that attack percentage will then go up. And remember, it's a standard weapon, so you can just go ahead and full send on just getting this weapon and getting refinements for it. So it's something to take into consideration. But if we are comparing this weapon comparative to the Broad Blade weapon, which does give energy regen and gives resonance liberation damage, I keep saying that, you are getting more value for this weapon compared to the Broad Blade weapon for this weapon for Changli and the Broad Blade weapon for Jinhsi'. So that means you are more inclined to roll for Jinhsi'S best in slot weapon because the difference isn't as huge as compared to this weapon for Changli, whereas the difference is Jinhsi'S weapon compared to the Broad Blade is way more of a gap, right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I tried to explain it the best way I can. So Jinhsi'S weapon has more value because, again, the crit stats you do get in the weapon. Now, again, I did mention this too. You can go cost 4 echoes on your Jinhsi', and that does alleviate a little bit of the pressure. But in my honest opinion, Jinhsi'S weapon just has more value, especially we are taking into consideration that Jinhsi' is a harder hitting character overall. So all of the buffs and passives you are giving to the character from weapons, external, internal sources, right? You are getting more value overall versus the 5-star for Changli, which is going to function alongside another damage dealer anyways, right? But that's just my opinion because she does buff the resonance liberation damage and the damage you then swap into the next character for, right? So overall, that's just how I see it. Jinhsi'S weapon has more value, so you can choose to do whatever you want to do with your account, but that's why I went with Jinhsi'S weapon. I probably will switch out to go for Changli'S weapon, but I mean, it's a temple. You can't really hope for too much on that, right? That's the video here. Thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day. Peace.